The rain hammered against the window like an angry fist demanding entry. Lieutenant Victoria Blake stood motionless in her small apartment, watching sheets of water blur the view of the naval base below. Dawn was breaking somewhere behind those dark clouds, but you would never know it. San Diego was drowning. On the kitchen table sat a coffee mug with faded letters reading "World's Best Dad." Victoria picked it up, her fingers tracing the worn ceramic. Her father had carried this mug every morning of her childhood. Marine Gunnery Sergeant Thomas Blake, killed in action in Fallujah when Victoria was 17 years old. She had been wearing his dog tags under her uniform every single day since. Military service was not a choice in the Blake family, it was destiny. Her father, Marines, her older brother James, Air Force pilot currently stationed in Germany. Her uncle David, Navy aviator, retired after 30 years of service. And Victoria herself had chosen the hardest path of all, Navy SEAL, Special Warfare Operator. She was one of only a handful of women who had successfully completed the punishing training pipeline. Basic underwater demolition. SEAL training, Bud S, had broken men twice her size. The instructors had pushed her harder than anyone, waiting for her to quit. She never did. Not during Hell Week when she spent 5.5 days in freezing ocean water on 4 hours of total sleep. Not during the endless underwater knot-tying drills where one mistake meant drowning. Not during the 20-mile beach runs carrying telephone poles or the surf torture sessions that made grown men cry. Victoria had earned her trident, the golden eagle clutching an anchor, trident, and flintlock pistol. The badge that said she was no longer just a sailor. She was a warrior. She had deployed to Afghanistan, conducted classified operations in the North Atlantic, trained Allied forces in 4 different countries, and participated in counter-terrorism missions she could never discuss outside secured facilities. But today's assignment was different. No combat gear, no weapons, no team backing her up. Today she was going undercover. Her orders came directly from Naval Special Warfare Command after months of disturbing reports from the training facility at Summit Point. The base, responsible for preparing new recruits for fleet assignments, had experienced an unprecedented spike in dropout rates. But more concerning were the complaints. Hazing, systematic intimidation, violence, a toxic culture that was breaking young sailors before they even reached their first ship. Command needed eyes and ears inside, someone who could blend in, observe, and gather evidence. Someone tough enough to handle whatever they found. Victoria had been the obvious choice. She drained the last of her coffee and set her father's mug down carefully. Time to go. 45 minutes later, Victoria pulled her modest sedan through the gates of Summit Point Naval Training Facility. The guard barely glanced at her identification before waving her through. Perfect. She was supposed to be invisible. Her cover was simple. Administrative officer assigned to process training records and update personnel files. Boring. Forgettable. The kind of desk job that real warriors looked past without a second thought. She wore no rank insignia that would indicate her true position. No decorations, nothing to suggest she was anything other than another paper pusher warming a chair until retirement. The base itself looked standard, low concrete buildings arranged in orderly rows, a central drill field where formations of recruits marched in the rain. Training facilities, barracks, mess halls, administrative offices. From the outside, everything appeared normal. But Victoria had learned long ago that monsters often wore ordinary faces. She checked in at the administration building, met her immediate supervisor, a distracted lieutenant commander who handed her a stack of files and pointed her toward a small desk in the back corner, and began her cover work. For the first 3 days, she simply observed. What she saw disturbed her deeply. The recruits fell into clear categories. There were the dedicated ones, the young men and women who took their training seriously, followed orders, and supported each other. Then there were the mediocre ones doing just enough to get by. And finally, there were the predators. Victoria identified them quickly. 5 recruits who moved through the base like wolves through a sheep pasture. They were older than most, likely here after washing out of other programs or getting second chances after disciplinary problems. They had names, but around the base, people used other words to describe them. Tank. A massive recruit, 6 feet 4 inches tall, built like a linebacker. He used his size to intimidate everyone around him. Spider. Wiry and quick with cold eyes that never blinked. He seemed to enjoy psychological torture more than physical. Diesel. Covered in tattoos with a perpetual sneer. He was the enforcer, the one who turned threats into action. Rock. Quiet and calculating. He planned the harassment while others carried it out. Snake. The cruelest of them all. He found people's weaknesses and exploited them without mercy. Together, they had created a kingdom of fear. Younger recruits gave them extra food at meals. People avoided them in hallways. Even some instructors seemed to look the other way, either intimidated themselves or simply unwilling to confront the problem. Victoria watched it all with growing anger. This was not training. This was abuse. And it was destroying the very foundation of what military service should represent: honor, discipline, mutual respect, and the willingness to sacrifice for something greater than oneself. On the afternoon of her 4th day at Summit Point, Victoria sat in the mess hall during lunch period, pretending to review paperwork while actually observing the dynamics around her. The 5 predators sat together at a central table, laughing loudly, taking up more space than they needed. Then she saw it happen. 3 young recruits, barely out of their teens, entered the mess hall carrying their trays. Victoria recognized them from her files: Williams, a quiet kid from Iowa; Martinez, a former high school wrestler from Texas; and Chen, an engineering student from California. All 3 were performing well in their training. All 3 kept their heads down and avoided trouble. But trouble found them anyway. As Williams and his friends tried to pass the table where the 5 sat, Tank deliberately stuck his leg out. Williams tripped, his tray flying, food scattering across the floor. The mess hall erupted in laughter, but it was nervous laughter, the kind that comes from fear rather than genuine amusement. "Watch where you're going, maggot," Tank said, his voice carrying across the room. Williams immediately dropped to his knees to clean up the mess, his face burning red with humiliation. His friends bent down to help him, but the 5 were not finished. Spider stood up slowly, a predatory smile on his face. "You know what? I don't think a simple sorry is going to cut it this time." Victoria's hands tightened on her paperwork. Every instinct in her body screamed at her to intervene, but her orders were clear. Observe, document, gather evidence. Do not blow your cover unless absolutely necessary. She watched as the 5 surrounded Williams and his friends, backing them against the wall. Other recruits in the mess hall suddenly found their meals very interesting, eyes down, nobody willing to look up. "I think you owe us an apology," Diesel said, cracking his knuckles. "A proper one. On your knees." Williams looked up, confusion and fear warring on his young face. I already said sorry." "Not good enough," Snake said coldly. "All 3 of you. On your knees. Now." Martinez, the wrestler, clenched his fists. "We didn't do anything wrong. You tripped him on purpose." Rock stepped forward, towering over Martinez. "You calling us liars?" The tension in the room became suffocating. Victoria could see it clearly now. This was a test. The 5 were pushing to see how far they could go, how much power they really had. If nobody stopped them here, the abuse would only escalate, and nobody was stopping them. The duty officer was nowhere to be seen. The other recruits sat frozen. Even the mess hall staff looked away. Victoria set down her paperwork and stood up. The sound of her chair scraping against the floor seemed impossibly loud in the tense silence. Every eye in the room turned toward her. She was a stranger here, an unknown quantity. Most people assumed she was just another desk officer, someone to ignore. She walked toward the confrontation with calm, measured steps. Her face betrayed no emotion. Her posture was relaxed but somehow commanded attention. "Gentlemen," she said quietly as she approached, "is there a problem here?" The five turned to look at her. For a moment, confusion flickered across their faces. Then Tank laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "Lady, this doesn't concern you. Go back to your paperwork." Victoria stopped a few feet away from them, her hands clasped loosely in front of her. She studied each of them in turn, her gaze lingering just long enough to make them uncomfortable. "Actually," she said in that same quiet voice, "I believe it does concern me. I work on this base. These recruits work on this base. That makes us all part of the same organization, the same team. And I'm curious, is this how teammates treat each other in the Navy?" Spider sneered. "What would you know about it? You're just a paper pusher. Probably never spent a day in real training." Victoria's expression did not change. "Perhaps. But I do understand basic human decency. And what I'm seeing right now doesn't look very decent." "Listen, sweetheart," Diesel said, his voice dripping with condescension. "Why don't you run along before you get hurt? This is between us and these losers who can't even walk straight." "Losers," Victoria repeated thoughtfully. "Interesting word choice. Tell me something. What makes someone a loser? Is it tripping over an intentionally placed obstacle? Or is it needing 4 friends to back you up when confronting someone half your size?" The mess hall had gone completely silent now. Everyone was watching. Williams and his friends stood frozen against the wall, unsure whether this stranger was helping them or making things worse. Rock stepped toward Victoria, invading her personal space in a classic intimidation tactic. "You got a smart mouth, lady. Maybe you should learn when to keep it shut." Victoria did not step back. She did not flinch. She simply looked up at him. She was 5 feet 8 inches tall, but Rock stood well over 6 feet and smiled slightly. "Or what?" she asked calmly. The silence lasted exactly 3 seconds. Then Tank laughed, but it was forced, uncertain. Nobody had ever challenged them like this before, not with such calm confidence, not without fear. "Or what?" Victoria repeated, her voice still perfectly calm. "What exactly will you do if I don't keep my mouth shut? I'm genuinely curious." Spider recovered first, stepping forward with a sneer. "Lady, you really don't want to find out. Walk away while you still can." Victoria tilted her head slightly as if considering this advice. Then she looked past the 5 bullies to where Williams and his friends stood frozen against the wall. "You 3, she said clearly. "Pick up your trays and sit down. Eat your lunch." "They're not going anywhere until we say so," Diesel growled. Victoria's eyes snapped back to him. For just a moment, something dangerous flickered in her gaze, a glimpse of the warrior beneath the civilian clothes. It was gone in an instant, but several people in the mess hall felt it. A chill ran down spines. "Actually," Victoria said quietly, "they are. Because this is a United States military facility, not a prison yard. And unless I'm very much mistaken, you 5 are recruits in training, which means you have no authority to give orders to anyone." "And who are you to tell us what we can and can't do?" Snake asked, his voice cold. "Someone who believes in following the rules. Someone who thinks the Navy stands for something more than intimidation and bullying. Someone who is very disappointed in what I'm seeing right now. The tension in the room was suffocating. Everyone waited to see what would happen next. Would the five back down? Would they attack this unknown woman? Would anyone intervene? Then the door to the mess hall slammed open. A duty officer, Lieutenant Junior Grade Harrison, strode in, his face flushed with irritation. "What is going on here?" he barked. "Why does it sound like a funeral in my mess hall?" The five immediately stepped back from Victoria, their expressions shifting to fake innocence. Tank even smiled. "Nothing, sir. Just a minor misunderstanding. Already resolved." Harrison looked around suspiciously, his gaze lingering on Williams and his friends against the wall, then moving to Victoria, standing alone in the middle of the confrontation zone. "Is that true, ma'am?" he asked Victoria. She could have exposed them right there, could have forced the issue, but something held her back. She needed more than one incident. She needed a pattern, documentation, evidence that would hold up in an official investigation. "Yes, sir," she said calmly. "Just a misunderstanding." Harrison looked unconvinced but nodded. "Then I suggest everyone sit down and eat before your lunch period ends. And you five," he pointed at Tank and his crew, "I better not hear about any more incidents. Clear?" "Crystal clear, sir," Rock said smoothly. Harrison left. The moment the door closed behind him, the mess hall exhaled collectively. People began eating again, conversations resumed, but everything felt different now. The five returned to their table, shooting dark looks at Victoria. She walked calmly back to her own table, picked up her paperwork, and left without another word. But as she walked out, she felt dozens of eyes following her. Who was she? Where had she come from? And why wasn't she afraid? Victoria spent the rest of that day documenting everything she had witnessed. Names, times, exact details of the confrontation. She took her findings to a secure communications room and filed an encrypted report directly to Naval Special Warfare Command. The response came back within hours. Continue observation. Do not engage unless lives are in immediate danger. Build the case. Over the next 72 hours, Victoria watched the base with the intensity of a predator studying prey. She saw things that made her sick with anger. She saw Tank cornering a recruit in the bathroom, demanding money for protection. The recruit, terrified, handed over $40. She saw Spider spreading vicious rumors about a female recruit, destroying her reputation and making her life unbearable. The woman eventually requested a transfer. She saw Diesel accidentally trip recruits during physical training, causing injuries that got blamed on clumsiness. She saw Rock manipulating duty rosters to ensure certain people got the worst assignments, while he and his friends skated by with minimal work. She saw Snake, the worst of them all, conducting psychological torture so subtle that instructors missed it entirely. He would isolate vulnerable recruits, plant seeds of doubt, make them question their worth, their abilities, their very right to wear the uniform. And she saw the system failing to stop any of it. Some instructors were overwhelmed and simply didn't notice. Others saw but didn't want the paperwork and hassle of filing reports. A few were intimidated themselves, reluctant to confront the five. And some, a disturbing number, seemed to view the hazing as traditional, even necessary. Toughening up the weak, separating those who had what it took from those who didn't. But Victoria knew better. She had been through Bullies, one of the most brutal training programs in the entire world. She understood the difference between hard training that built warriors and cruel abuse that broke spirits. What she was witnessing here was not training. It was predation. On the evening of her 7th day at Summit Point, Victoria returned to her apartment and sat at her kitchen table with her father's coffee mug. She thought about what he would say if he could see this place. Gunnery Sergeant Thomas Blake had been hard as iron, demanding excellence from everyone around him. But he had also been fair, principled, and absolutely intolerant of bullying. True strength, he had told Victoria once, is protecting those who can't protect themselves. Anyone can hit someone smaller. That's not strength. That's just being a coward with fists. Victoria had carried those words through every difficult moment of her career. Through Bud S when instructors screamed in her face and told her women had no place in special operations. Through combat deployments when enemy fighters underestimated her because of her gender. Through countless situations where she could have used her skills to dominate others but chose instead to lead by example. She opened her encrypted laptop and reviewed the evidence she had compiled. Pages of incident reports. Testimony from frightened recruits who spoke to her in whispers. Photographs of bruises. Financial records showing extortion, a clear pattern of systematic abuse. It was enough. More than enough. She could file her final report, recommend immediate intervention, and let military police handle the rest. But Victoria wanted more than just arrests. She wanted these 5 to truly understand what they had done. To face the consequences not just legally but personally. She wanted them to feel what their victims had felt. Fear. Helplessness. The bitter realization that they were not as strong as they believed. And she had an idea how to make that happen. The next morning, Victoria walked into the mess hall during breakfast and sat at a table with perfect visibility of the 5. They noticed her immediately. Since their confrontation days earlier, they had kept their distance, wary of this strange woman who didn't react the way people were supposed to. She ate slowly, watching them over the rim of her coffee cup. Tank whispered something to Spider. Both laughed, but it sounded forced. They were unsettled by her continued presence, her calm observation. Good. Victoria finished her breakfast, stood, and walked directly to their table. The mess hall went quiet again. People sensed something coming. She stopped in front of Tank, looking up at his massive frame. "I've been thinking about our conversation," she said quietly, "about strength and weakness and what it means to be a warrior." "Yeah?" Tank said, trying to sound bored. "That's fascinating. I have a proposition for you, all 5 of you." Spider leaned back in his chair. "We're not interested in anything you're selling, lady." Victoria smiled slightly. "You haven't heard the proposition yet. Here it is. You 5 keep claiming you're strong, that you're warriors, that weak people don't belong here. I'd like to test that theory." "Test it how?" Rock asked suspiciously. "Simple. All 5 of you. Against me. Right here, right now. If you win, I'll leave this base and you'll never see me again. If I win, you admit in front of everyone that you're nothing but bullies and cowards." The silence was absolute. Every person in the mess hall stared in disbelief. Was this woman insane? Suicidal? Or did she know something they didn't? Tank recovered first, his face splitting into a genuine smile. "You're joking." "I've never been more serious in my life." Snake stood up slowly. "Lady, you have no idea what you're asking for. We'll hurt you. Then you'll hurt me. But at least everyone will know what you really are." Victoria's voice remained perfectly calm. "Unless you're afraid." That did it. The challenge to their pride delivered in front of their entire peer group. They couldn't back down now without looking weak. Diesel cracked his knuckles. "Your funeral." Victoria stood perfectly still as the 5 surrounded her in a loose circle. The mess hall had transformed into a makeshift arena. Recruits pushed back from tables, creating space. Some stood on chairs for a better view. Nobody left. Everyone sensed they were about to witness something extraordinary. "Last chance to back out, lady," Tank said, rolling his massive shoulders. "We don't want to hurt you." How considerate, Victoria replied. Her voice remained calm, almost pleasant. But I think we both know that's not true. You enjoy hurting people. That's why you're here. That's why you pick on those smaller and weaker than you. Spider circled to her left. You talk a lot for someone about to get destroyed. Actually, I'm curious about something, Victoria said, turning slightly to keep all five in her peripheral vision. Do any of you actually know how to fight? Or do you just rely on intimidation and numbers? Diesel laughed harshly. You're about to find out. Commander Martinez burst through the mess hall doors at that moment, his face red with fury. What in the name of God is going on here? Everyone sit down immediately. Nobody moved. The tension was too thick, the confrontation too far along to stop now. Tank spoke up, his voice mockingly respectful. Sir, this woman challenged us to a fight. We tried to decline, but she insisted. We're just defending our honor. Martinez looked at Victoria, confusion and concern warring on his face. Ma'am, I don't know who you are, but I strongly advise against this course of action. Victoria met his eyes calmly. Noted, Commander. But I'm proceeding anyway. These five need to learn an important lesson about respect, strength, and what it truly means to be warriors. Martinez hesitated, then stepped back. Something in Victoria's bearing, her absolute confidence, made him pause. He had spent 20 years in the Navy. He recognized command presence when he saw it, even when it wore civilian clothes. Your choice, he said quietly. But this ends at first blood or submission. Clear? Crystal clear, sir, Victoria said. The five spread out, forming a circle around her. This was their natural hunting pattern. Surround, isolate, overwhelm. It had worked dozens of times before. Rock made the first move, rushing from behind while Tank charged from the front. Classic pincer attack. Victoria waited until the last possible second, then dropped into a crouch and rolled left. Rock and Tank collided with bone-crunching force, both stumbling backwards, stunned. Before they could recover, Victoria was on her feet. Spider lunged at her with a wild swing. She caught his arm, used his momentum against him, and executed a perfect judo throw. Spider hit the floor hard. The wind knocked from his lungs. 3 down, 2 to go, Victoria said quietly. Anyone else? Diesel and Snake exchanged glances. This wasn't going according to plan. The quiet woman had just dropped 3 of their crew in under 10 seconds. But pride and anger overrode caution. They attacked together, trying to grab her arms. Victoria twisted, broke free, delivered a precise elbow strike to Diesel's solar plexus that folded him in half, gasping. Snake tried to choke her from behind. She dropped her weight, broke his grip with a practiced technique, and swept his legs. He crashed down beside his friends. Silence filled the mess hall. Absolute shocked silence. Tank struggled to his feet, rage replacing his earlier confidence. You got lucky. Let's go again. No, Commander Martinez stepped forward, his voice carrying military authority. This is over. All 5 of you on your feet at attention now. They obeyed, moving slowly, clearly hurting. Martinez walked to Victoria, studying her with new eyes. Ma'am, I think it's time you explained exactly who you are. Victoria reached into her pocket and pulled out military identification. Martinez's eyes widened as he read it. Lieutenant Victoria Blake, Naval Special Warfare Command, Navy SEAL. He looked up at her, then at the 5 stunned recruits. You 5 just assaulted a superior officer. The blood drained from their faces as the full weight of what they had done crashed down on them. The aftermath moved with military efficiency. Within 20 minutes, military police arrived and placed all 5 recruits under arrest. They were handcuffed, read their rights, and escorted from the mess hall in front of 300 witnesses. Victoria filed her official report while the base went into lockdown. Commander Martinez personally oversaw the investigation, his face grim as he reviewed weeks of documented evidence Victoria had compiled. The court-martial proceedings began 72 hours later. Victoria testified for 6 hours, presenting incident reports, witness statements, photographic evidence of injuries, and financial records showing systematic extortion. 23 other recruits came forward with their own stories, emboldened by Victoria's courage. The evidence was overwhelming. Tank, Spider, Diesel, Rock, and Snake had created a reign of terror that had been tolerated, ignored, or enabled by a broken system. The verdict came swiftly. Dishonorable discharge, 6 months in military prison for assault on a superior officer. Additional charges for hazing, extortion, and conduct unbecoming. But the real punishment was something they felt immediately: the loss of respect, reputation, and future. Dishonorable discharge meant no veterans' benefits, difficulty finding employment, a permanent stain on their records. Williams and his friends, the recruits who had been their victims, visited Victoria before she left the base. "Thank you, ma'am," Williams said, standing at attention. "You didn't have to do what you did. You could have just filed a report." "Yes, I could have," Victoria agreed. "But sometimes people need to see justice done, not just hear about it later. You three will make excellent sailors. Don't let anyone tell you differently." Commander Martinez called Victoria to his office on her final day at Summit Point. "I owe you an apology, Lieutenant. This happened on my watch. I should have seen it, should have stopped it. Sir, you did your best with the information you had. The system failed, not you personally, but it can be fixed." "It will be," Martinez said firmly. "New protocols, mandatory reporting, zero-tolerance policy. This will never happen again on my base." 6 months later, Victoria Blake stood on the deck of a destroyer in the Pacific Ocean, back in her element. She had completed her investigation at Summit Point, testified at the court-martial, and returned to active duty with her SEAL team. But the story didn't end there. The Summit Point case became a watershed moment for the Navy. New anti-hazing regulations were implemented across all training facilities. Anonymous reporting systems were established. Commanders received mandatory training on recognizing and addressing toxic cultures. Williams graduated at the top of his class and received orders to a guided missile cruiser. Martinez implemented reforms that reduced dropout rates by 40%, while actually increasing training standards. The base became a model for how to build warriors through discipline and respect rather than fear. As for Victoria, she received a commendation for her undercover work, though the details remained classified. Her teammates never knew about the 5 bullies she had taken down in a mess hall, and she never mentioned it. For her, it was just another mission completed. But on that base, in that mess hall, her legend lived on. New recruits heard the story, probably exaggerated with each retelling, of the quiet woman who took down 5 attackers and changed everything. One evening, Victoria sat in her quarters reviewing mission briefings when her phone buzzed. A message from Williams. "Deployed. Doing great. Thank you for everything, ma'am. You showed me what real strength looks like." Victoria smiled, thinking of her father and the words he had taught her so many years ago. True strength is protecting those who cannot protect themselves. She had honored his memory. She had upheld the values he died defending, and she had proven that sometimes one person standing up can change everything. Outside, the ocean stretched endlessly under a clear sky. Tomorrow would bring new missions, new challenges, new battles. But tonight, Victoria Blake could rest knowing she had made a difference.